Welcome to another Disc Guidance segment with 2MK Team. We have 3 new characters at once, and that means bots, but these bots can't all go in the same Disc Guidance. We did have a little bit of discussion about the new ones in our robotics lab on Monday, earlier this week. And this Friday we are starting with our HondaBot first. As always, we'll be going through this bit by bit, first talking about why the bot is designed the way it is and what it's meant to teach you, or help you with. Then inputs, and then a couple of special things. There should be pretty much nothing that you absolutely need to be around for after all of the inputs have been made clear. So consider it additional for understanding principles of how to build this sort of thing and why it's built the way it is, especially if you have input or want to make some modifications yourself. As always, if you do have any input or questions that the stream does not cover, you can contact us at the contact page at our website 2-mk.org. HondaBot took a little while, and it still has a couple of things relative to variants that might change a little bit. But what you're seeing on screen now is the basic version, in that it's relatively easy to input compared to most things, and covers a lot of the basics of how to play against the character as well as what he does as a generality. As always, our bots are mainly for helping players get used to the character at the play levels and styles of players, let's say in the bronze to silver strength levels. This of course is the sort of thing you can see from anyone, but we're talking like first order strategy stuff that you need to deal with if you want to be able to handle him as a whole. Especially when you don't necessarily have as much control over your own character yet, or really strong understandings of the game. Amara will be starting off playing Abigail, of course, and after a while we'll let you to switch to Chun-Li when I'm demonstrating other aspects of it. Honda as a character is strong in footsies. Has always been decently strong in footsies. Good space control. A couple things about him that are hard to get used to or understand when you're used to other characters, which help you get tricked a little bit, let's say. And some multiple approaches that you have to react to, similar to Bison or Alex. Combinations of this with his command grab and his generally decent jump and dash leads to players being able to play a style of him that doesn't really revolve around getting pressure on you. At least not in the earlier levels, it's not as required. Plays decently well without ever actually being able to get a lot of pressure. This is partially because of the large range on his grab and command grab. I think that's balanced primarily by the fact that he doesn't get anything good after a grab. And the command grab not only doesn't give him much, it also doesn't actually do a lot of damage. You can do some comparison, as you see here, based on Abigail's health and later Chun-Li's health, but overall it's not that threatening a move. It's similar to, for example, Rainbow Mika's Brimstone Throw, which is annoying, but doesn't necessarily take off that much health. Our aim with the bot, therefore, was to generate the feeling of a character who has the capacity to jump in on you with specific timings, as Honda has always been able to jump and be very deceptive about it. It's extremely difficult to explain what exactly he does, but basically the way his reach from a jump works and his jump arc mean that he's relatively easily able to fake out people when he's jumping in on them, and yet still if they try to air, for example, he tends to win. In fact, he tends to win so consistently, as you've just seen with that neutral jump heavy punch, for example, that we don't even suggest trying to fight him that way. At least not at the lower levels. You can anti-air this character, and we are not going to make any point systems based around this, as this is entirely up to the character you're using and your playstyle, where you like to be in the game. But just be aware that it can sometimes be frustrating to try to anti-air the Honda. You're often better off getting out of the way, and he, in turn, doesn't do damage but benefits from this, mostly by setting up situations, pushing you backward, or similar things. Fortunately, while he's using this tactic for his jump-ins, he also doesn't easily combo from them. And that isn't something we specifically had to try to put into the bot, it just does that naturally. The final point is the relative difficulty of whiff punishing certain of his moves. Because of the animations of Honda's heavy punch, crouching, to some extent the standing one, which he doesn't necessarily use that often in footsies, and even his sweep, he can stick out buttons that can be hard to hit because he often retracts the hurt box quite quickly. And in this game, even though it's not quite so set up in that way, he still does cause a lot of problems because of the difficulty in recognizing his moves. Finally, as you can see, we made sure he had that classic grappler jumping light kick, in this case the cross-up, into command grab, and the surprising range of his command grab often meant to take you by surprise as a general thing, but also to make you think about the fact that if he doesn't need to use it, you still have to block, and he's plus a lot. So while the bot will generally not do anything much else after a jump-in, you still have to learn to deal with the jump-in itself in one way or another, because players, depending on their skill with the 100 hand slap input, will do something. It's very important therefore to learn what ranges you should try to anti-air him from with your own particular character, and which ones you shouldn't. Final notes of importance are of course his special moves, his headbutt, his new powerful V triggers, and of course Sumo Splash, which is one of the most tricky moves in Street Fighter, honestly. Let's look therefore at his V trigger 2. He's been doing a good job with V trigger 1, but it's hard to break Amara's defenses with something you could block. The bot can charge that move all the way to guard break, but generally will not, as it takes away too many other things. You can modify it to charge it longer, but it generally, again, doesn't work that well. What we care about here, therefore, is dealing with his V-Trigger 2. The bot actually does work fine with V-Trigger 1, especially against characters where the headbutt is actually going to help him. Just set the bot to whatever you consider the more threatening V-Trigger for your character to be, and he should probably still work fine. He doesn't seem to have any differences with the inputs we have in whether or not he's effective with one V-Trigger or another. It seems to depend a lot more on the opposing character. Therefore, our preliminary discussion of the point system is relatively simple. Obviously, one of the main things you want to do against him is get away from that command grab. But that's honestly not the main thing you should be focused on at first. Especially against players just getting used to the character or who want to be frustrating, the Sumo Splash is more important. The Sumo Splash itself may be hard to get the bot to do sometimes, and if your inputs aren't particularly good, he may only have one of them. Do your best to fix it up so he has at least the option of using the other Sumo Splash. He should do this move fairly rarely, as you can see here. But that just makes it harder to deal with. When he does do it, with the current version of the bot, we only gave him the light and the medium. The light puts him in front of you, he does it more often, but if he happens to be closer and you're not playing too defensively, then you can actually counter it. You can choose to not view it as a counter if he had no chance of hitting you, and that might be a good way to deal with it. But since he often puts you in the corner or causes some problem similar to that, it's up to you entirely how you approach it. If you decided you want to stay further from Honda in order to fight him in general, then him doing Sumo Splash at those ranges is really a thing that might happen. He also has the heavy Sumo Splash, and he has it as a weird negative edge, which is why it might not be so recognizable at first. Heavy Sumo Splash goes quite far, and meaning it tends to cross up. Certainly crosses up at the ranges where light would have landed right in front of you. How you choose to counter this move is entirely up to you, because the fact that he has two of them means that you can learn about how your counter can be beaten by one or the other. If you have a universal counter to Sumo Splash, good for you, and you should probably just keep that as your response. You can't really bait you with it much. And it's important to recognize when you just have a straight up advantage and take it. The second point is actually for evading and punishing his V-trigger. This almost always means jumping backward. There are a few characters that have other options, and technically parries should count, but parries only help you against the first V-trigger anyway. Most of the time, this works similar to to his running bear grab, i.e. Siberian Express. Just jump backward. In almost every case, this is what you want to do. When you're close to the corner and you see this happening, you can jump straight up with certain characters and it'll be equally effective. This bot is one of our maximum start settings bots, meaning that you can get more chances to do this by basically giving him more meter to do it with. But he shouldn't have more meter from the system. We're talking about beating him up and actually doing damage. But he is a great character at actually chipping away at you a bit or doing surprising things when you're just trying to beat him up. You can do this by meaties and you'll probably get away with it, but if you don't go for at least the meaties aspect of it, you're going to have a bit of problems. And of course, as you know, with all our bots, the difficulty of certain things, or rather what you get points for, lessens over time. The third point system is to choose one move and whiff punish that move. The only thing we would say you should not choose is his stomp. His stomp is whiff punishable, yes, but the way the block is designed, we don't have a way to make that one threatening. It's also relatively easy to start up, and so on. Even though he can tower cancel it, depending on your character, the whiff punish is easy even if he does. And it's a bad habit to get into either way, because as soon as you meet a player who has mastered the art of tower cancelling it in a very scary way, you are going to get hit for trying the whiff punish. So don't whiff punish that move until you are really good at this game and at this bot. Your better options are the choice of his throw, which is the easiest thing, but you should of course consider that most players will not just whiff throw or neutral. His V skill, which is rare and therefore difficult to get points from, and his sweep and crouch heavy punch, which are our recommendations as to how to do this, but they're obviously hard to actually whiff punish in multiple ways. Still, even though these moves are not moves that are likely to be used super heavily in footsies, being able to either set up that whiff punish or get into a situation where it's the better option for Honda and then beat him using it are very important things. And finally, of course the hardest point, is to tech his throw. This is specifically tech the throw, not just escape it. This is partially because Honda can be +2 after 100 hands. And while the bot generally will not actually throw that much at that point, you have to get very used to this move and figuring out how to get out of situations when it happens. Just being close to him in general can be problematic, and he doesn't throw that often either, meaning that you don't get a lot of chances to tech the throw, but when he does go for a throw, it tends to be extremely important. In his V-Trigger 1 state, he can cancel out of the 100 hand slap. We have generally not given him anything other than the light one. The move is not that meaningful other than the light outside of combos. So it didn't seem so necessary to make sure the bot had it, as it's generally quite difficult to make sure that a bot has multiple of that without messing it up. But there are very, very rare situations in which he may do a different 100 hand slap. We have not yet seen an EX1 period, even though he does seem to have the capacity to do other moves of that type. And we're not absolutely sure he can do the medium. But this may also depend on your input speed and skill, which is partially why we are not counting on it. We know for a fact that with even decent inputs, the light one will become available, and whether or not others are also available is up to your execution. Which brings us into our discussion of the inputs themselves. So as always, we will try to go through these in about 20 minutes, just quickly going over what each input is for and why it's input that way. We will not go too heavily into variants, but in case you want to know how to make certain switches, this should be the section you want to pay attention to. As always, we are trying to do this on a stage where it is dark enough in the background for you to see the inputs quickly. Even when paused. Action 1 for HondaBot is a forward medium punch, which we prefer is first frame, but actually doesn't have to be. And just quickly tap that twice. No need to hold it or anything like that. And then, either while holding forward or just holding nothing on the D-pad and going neutral, hit one light punch, which can or cannot be hidden. It doesn't specifically seem to matter too much. It's more so a matter of, is it fast enough to trigger the 100-hand slap in combination with other inputs? It's not really, did this button come out or not. The second medium punch input must be hidden, but generally if you tap a button like that quickly twice, that's what will happen, so it's not really concerning. As soon as you've hit that light punch, hold up forward for a very short time, quickly hold down back. He should in fact jump. Sometimes he takes a little bit to jump, but he should jump. And at that point, just when he gets to approximately the top of his jump, end the recording. You should generally be holding down back at this time, and it will combine with some other things to help get enough charge to be helpful. It will not necessarily give him enough charge to use this input back into itself to do the headbutt, as you're seeing. He doesn't necessarily do this. If you end up going a little bit far back, or like rolling through up and up back while getting to the down back direction, that's completely fine. The occasional jump back in this bot is really no problem. He tends to fight from ranges where occasionally jumping back out of things was not really that bad for him. Interestingly, this is the input that is technically the easiest to put in, and as you know, we sometimes put inputs into a bot that are meant to be replaced and then put back in later as needed. This is the input for here. Action 5 turned out to be a little bit more tricky, and we tend to put these in order of what you need to help you test other ones that are trickier and you need some feedback on. So this one is relatively easy to input, fairly lenient, but when you want to do some changes, this is the one you want to change, especially if there's new technology found out. This is a reasonably easy thing to change, especially if you're at a high enough level where you're not worried about Honda jumping on you. He doesn't really need this one as much, and starting it with, say, medium punch, light will almost always be enough for the required 100 hand slaps, and you can put whatever else in here. In fact, we do believe that due to certain things, this is where the cooler Honda stuff such as the counter cancel can be put. Specifically that you can put in forward medium punch, one hidden medium punch, probably throw rather than just light punch, down forward heavy kick, and then from there go up to up forward, i.e. 9, quickly spin all the way back to 4, going all the way from the front, as in you're basically doing 270, not a 360 full, but so from up forward to forward, down, down back, back, end. This would have to be very fast, so note that you should not be trying this, even if you fear the counter cancel Honda, unless you have the execution, as it's just not going to work out well enough. If you do that in quick enough timing, and I mean really quick timing, he should be able to counter cancel his stomp if he meets certain requirements and certain other things are happening. He should also be able to do it after his stand medium punch, and if you get that timing exactly right, it creates the stand medium punch close range mix-up. So consider this as an option for higher levels of this bot, a variant you can use to make it more threatening in a particular way without directly putting out a problem for you. He should not jump while he's stomping, but he should still have the capacity to jump if he were interrupted, for example, in some other action and didn't end up doing the down forward heavy kick. We expect though that with the speed required for the input, you will see much less jumps from here, if not none sometimes. Input 2 is also relatively simple. We had a simpler one at first. You can use simpler ones than this if you have little or no interest in his V skill. However, his V skill cancels well into a lot of things, and there's some benefit to having it in here, so you can try to simply have down back. This is, again, not really necessary to be first frame, but because of the method you can use to record it, specifically that you can set this value in interval setting to 1, hold down back from the beginning, and until you press a button, it won't register the down back input. It won't start the recording. So you want button input, interval setting 1, and then you would be able to hold down back for the 1 second, and then just tap a button and it will be perfectly first frame immediately. From there, you need to hit 1 V trigger, another light punch, another V trigger, and then a throw in the easy version. And you are holding down back the entire time. This is basically bouncing back between tapping some buttons, and therefore relatively easy. If you're using a stick, it's often easy to piano around anyway, so this actual input as it stands now turns out to be a little bit easier. In this case, we are using the light punch. Let's change this to make it a little bit clearer actually. Playback settings. Interval 1. As you can see, he starts with the light punch, does the V trigger, V light punch again, V skill, V trigger, light punch one more time. This is a little harder to do, but not terribly. Note that this doesn't actually need to be fast enough to cause him to do the 100 hand slap by itself. As you can see, the heavy kick, which comes out because of the V trigger, can end up taking advantage of this and moving him around. And he doesn't necessarily end up doing the 100 hand slap too often. Because the light punch is cancelable into itself, if you do this with quick enough timing, he should sometimes just hit light punch twice. But this input is entirely able on its own to give you a light 100 hand slap, which is relatively important, but not terribly so. If you find that it never does this, because you slowed down at the end for some reason, this is usually okay. Action 3 is interestingly a straight up jump. For various reasons, this functions decently well on Honda in general. He's a very good neutral jump strength character. His hurt box moves out of the way well, his various neutral jump buttons, particularly his neutral jump heavy punch, very good. And this will be able to trigger light Sumo Splash. So just straight up, it's better to try to make sure it's actually straight up. But you can move from there all the way through the same 270, going to forward, to down, to back. And you can usually do this fairly cleanly. This does not need to be first frame, therefore just treat it as any other charge move. If done really well, this sort of character gets hit by it. Specifically, Abigail and similar tall characters are hit by the move on the way up. This timing, if done even decently, is what allows him to get that jumping light kick into Oicho throw. Since the attack starts with the up light kick, but it doesn't really matter, he'd already been in the air from, let's say, action 1. He hits with the light kick and lands approximately with the timing required to do the throw. This is how you can tell if the amount of time you hung in the air on action 1 is acceptable. He should be able to do that most of the time. It's a relatively simple input and combines with others. You can't really tell too much about it on its own other than just make sure you went through the entire set of strikes and perhaps then combine it with another action to see if you can get a grab. For example, this is the easiest way to do this combination check. With actions 1 and 3 on. Action 4 is also variable by your character, but it needs to be short, and this changes a lot of things. Specifically, it is where we put a few things that we need to happen randomly in between other things, and therefore pop up when he's interrupted or when the specific animations of some of his other moves don't fit into an easy rhythm. However, it's a very easy input. Forward, medium plus heavy, down forward, heavy kick, dash forward. You can change the first thing he does to a throw, but this causes him to whiff throw a lot and limits his headbutts. If you want him to be able to do EX headbutt, you need this input, and EX headbutt is fairly meaningful. He also does heavy headbutt, which is a good anti-air for the character, and tends to suppress people doing certain things, but often leaves him a little bit vulnerable, meaning that again, at the higher levels of advanced usage of this bot, you might not want him to do that too much, and you might want to use, for example, forward medium punch plus light punch in order to make sure you get an EX headbutt without the heavy punch part. Just go with whatever suits your character. The main goal is to get the EX headbutt. The down forward heavy kick is just in here to make sure that he gets something else, and in this case it's set as a V trigger. It does not have to be, but if you do set it as a V trigger, it generally has no flaws, except that you might feel he uses his V trigger too much. And the dash is there because you have to get used to Honda dashing. He's actually a fairly good character when dashing, and as you can see with this timing, he dashes into the stomp. Reacting to this and dealing with it can be very important. Because he dashes into the stomp, however, you can also run into some problems with the timing for other things, because if you do need the dash, you get this timing. This is too slow for him to counter cancel this stomp. You can replace the dash with some of his counter cancel options if you find that it goes better here, but we find this is not so great because it generally wouldn't help directly. It requires a lot of very precise spacing, and a player will outperform the bot, no question, at that point. Therefore, we just put this in here so that he occasionally stomps, so you get used to the move, the fact that it's plus, the dash input is enough time that he will probably use that advantage to do something else, and you have to respect the something else, etc. He can of course dash into anything else you combine this with, and interestingly, if you do it with action 3 sometimes, he will in fact get the dash up Ocho throw. But more often he'll just dash up and jump over your head like that, which is honestly just as dangerous. The other reason for needing this is so he can do EEX Ocho throw, as shown there. So please make sure that if you are shifting this input around, that you at least put in medium punch, light punch, or something at the start, so that he keeps all his functions. And finally, Action 5 should be recorded from outside of Honda's strike range to make it as clean as possible. And this is by far the hardest input in this bot. Not even like close. This starts with a light kick. And this looks really easy input-wise, but the timing required for it is so strict that we were hesitant to actually use this input at all. It will in fact therefore have a variant. His light kick is required for many reasons, including combos, and just teaching the player that at certain spaces he has advantage and can use it to hit the light kick, which in turn goes into other things. This light kick must be standing, and then you can simply do light punch, crouch heavy punch, down back throw. But again, the timing for this is extremely fast, extremely strict, in that he must always do the heavy punch and light kick only when you replay it. If he can throw, or he can do the light punch, the timing's off. There may be some where that works, but we do not believe there to be too many. Of course you can hit him and it should switch him to this form. And you can hit him again and it will switch him to a different form. But generally, from of course a raw recording start, this is what he should do, with absolute consistency. Fortunately, while the input is very straight and precise, it's also not terribly hard to repeat trying to do, so eventually it has a good chance of coming out on the right timing just by luck, and in that case just leave it and save it. As for gauge options, again, he functions with maximum start on both gauges. The player gets auto recover on their critical gauge, mostly so that they can use specific EX moves and similar things against some of his moves. You really don't want to spend too much time with low meter against Honda if you can help it, and it's not too hard to build meter against this character unless you spend a lot of it trying to open him up or similar, which you generally shouldn't do as far as we know. However, the player only gets normal V gauge in order to lessen their capacity to do V reversals to get out of problems. As always, the bot has auto recovering health. So from there we'll go into a clearer demonstration of why the bot is built this way and what you can expect from it. as a result of that.
Underground arena. Chun-Li. Honda.
We will in fact start with the headbutt V-trigger, once again to mostly show it off and explain what you can gain from setting him to this, even if you're the type that expects your opponents to constantly try to command grab you. I will be stopping at certain times to show off things with specific combinations. This is not really a bot where you can benefit much by turning off any given input, but there are a couple tricks you can use. Starting from full, therefore, your main issue is that he's not going to let you walk up to him in footsies without just headbutting you. If you have a projectile though, this is relatively easy to get around, until he gets more V-trigger or uses the EX version. Because he also tends to jump out of certain footsie situations, he's a decent way to train that sort of thing. Sumo Splash also takes him out of the way of many of these moves, and as you can see, it hits on the way up, so if you are at that range and happen to be trying something you shouldn't, quote unquote, he can in fact just respond in the same way Guile can by doing the equivalent of a flash kick against quite a few characters. The range he fights from also shifts this. As you can probably guess, the reason why he can charge that is that you were supposed to hold one of the V-trigger inputs. You will note this on the page when we release it as well. You can hold either one really. It's not terribly important. You could hold either the one at the end of the 100 hand or the one with this side, but generally we hold the one in the 100 hand slap, which is what also makes that input kind of hard. Hold the other one if you find it easier. It just shifts some of his behaviors relative to what exactly happens after he comes out of a dash.
Perfect KO.
So he should have the capacity, when he dashes up to you, to quickly do 100 hand slap, which is itself advantaged, and he can do this by buffering it within the dash, which is partially why you have to care. Your opponent can dash up to you and time things in such a way that they can hit a light and finish a confirmation into light 100 hand slap, B +2, and B minimum range. This move is also cancelable into his V triggers, so if he did hit you, he gets extra damage. The heavy punch is shown as an option he has in footsies when you are interrupting him as well. And he has some good spacing and ranges, similar to our HondaBot, where he often is in a good position for himself just by the natural flow and tends to block a decent amount of things. You should pay attention generally to exactly how much you see counter hit come up when you try to hit him after, say, his headbutt. as you may be surprised, which moves don't let you get away with this. Now, because he does have quite a bit of pushback on certain versions of the 100 Hands Back, him being plus doesn't necessarily mean that you are in a serious close range pressure problem situation. It just means that your opponent has advantage and you shouldn't be hitting buttons. When playing footsies with him, your main goal is to remain alert and not overdo it. Particularly if you see him standing, but he shouldn't generally be trying to use a whole lot of standing moves. If you have good long footsie buttons, you at least have a chance, but bear in mind once again that if you overdo it, he's likely to either get you with Sumo Splash by going completely over your button, or get you with Headbutt because you felt it was time to hit again. And since he does not extend his own hurt box for quite a while, when doing that headbutt, you're not as likely to get the hit on him. As you see there, the throw does tend to come out more so when he's gotten you into a bad situation from your side than anything else, due to the rhythm of the bot. We expect that this will be consistent across almost everyone's inputs because of just how tight that final input that actually contains the throw is. So now we're going to move into evading the V-trigger headbutt. You might think that that move is actually fairly easy to evade, but for the most part, because he doesn't have to charge it up until that point, he can actually catch you by releasing it earlier instead. Therefore, it's fine that the bot uses this method as its primary method. Overall, when facing your V-Trigger 1 Honda, the bot will not in fact charge to guard break that often. Instead, he will charge a bit, giving you the feeling, oh, I can probably evade this late, and the answer will be no, you cannot. He actually will be able to hit you, or at least force you to block, depending on how you moved, before you leave the ground, if you decided to jump, and possibly before the startup of your parry or similar move, if you decided to just do that late and get a big punish on him as a result. Even more interestingly, he tends to whiff under you if you use a character that has an uppercut and you weren't in position already. Since he can also cancel the move, you're stuck in that if you attempt to jump out too early and he doesn't charge it, depending on your spacing, you get clipped. If he does charge it and you've decided, okay, I've been blocking long enough, I should probably move now, he can catch you because you decided that's the moment you were going to move. And of course, if you decide to sit there the entire time, he could, although again the bot generally will not, charge it to guard break level. So I'll add a little more damage to our HondaBot so he can do this more often, which is approximately the natural rate you'd find on that side as well. But let's look at the anti-airs while we're at it. Again, this is not really a purpose of the bot. You may need to use a different anti-air button depending on your character. For example, Chili often uses her back heavy punch against him with certain jump ranges, even though normally it would not do much. You have to care quite a lot about whether or not your grounded anti-air reaches high enough to tap Honda out of the air. As you can see here, even though my timing, I will completely admit, is terrible, characters who use the jab anti-air may find themselves whiffing on the character or being at risk because of the reach of his air normals, their really strong down forward hitboxes, and so on. Perfectly reacting with jabs is quite difficult, and he can do a lot of weird things when you try. If you have strong aerial anti-airs, it's normally easier to deal with. But do be careful about these because they often make you very vulnerable to the Sumo Splash, as you're often looking for him to go into the air. If input perfectly, the V trigger and V skill give the impression of a character who has stood up and has lost their charge, but if you're experienced enough, you already know how this goes. It does not mean that the character is not charging. Specifically, that Honda can use his V skill, move himself slightly forward on the screen, and still be maintaining both down and back charge. This means you cannot as easily abuse the fact that he cannot move around that way. Unlike, say, Guile, who, while he does have a V skill and a way to attack, that attack doesn't really do anything, and it doesn't move him forward. Similarly, Bison IV Dictator has a move that will let him do certain things, in his case more so for defense, but again, doesn't actually move him forward at all. Honda can move at least a little bit. As seen there, he can cancel the 100 hands into the V trigger headbutt, but I'm not really sure what benefit this gives him on block. He was already plus, and it really doesn't do much other than take the opponent by surprise in particular ways. And let him get him back closer to V trigger. Bear in mind that that move has one hit of armor, adding one more level to the difficulty of trying to play footsies with this character for long periods. While it does not armor his other headbutts, it does make you flinch when it comes to dealing with them in quite a lot of cases. So overall, it is in fact difficult to evade this move because by the time you recognize he wants to do it, you often should just end up blocking it. Which isn't so terrible for him, but there are definitely situations where he wants to make you block this move. Or stay still long enough that he can guard break you with it. You can also practice if he does the dash up version. On characters like Chun-Li who have the option of it, using a multi-hit move to break the armor and quickly get through and take him down. But you can expect quite a lot from the bot of that dash up, charging that move. And players do have at least a couple uses for it in that, again, it's armored. Him dashing up and doing that, especially if you're the type that tries to respond to dashes with good long buttons or footsies, but tend to be only fast enough to actually stop the opponent's next attack, it becomes a powerful tool for him. One with very little direct risk, unlike most other applications of tactics like that. So let's look into his V-Trigger 2. There isn't too much difference in how you should train against the bot for this V-Trigger. The main difference being that he has quicker access to it, which is somewhat interesting as it's, by many standards, the more dangerous move. At least at the beginnerish levels, it will be harder to deal with. As it also has armor and quickly negates the idea of playing footsies with him for long periods. You can jump out of this move relatively easily, but recognizing when it has started and therefore you should be doing that can be difficult if you are used to blocking strings of attacks. In other words, most of us block long enough, especially against characters using longer attacks, that we don't jump out of the way in time. We have to be relatively heavily expecting it. But since this move does not need to be used raw, he can just play normally and eventually use it on you in a combo, the player doesn't have a specific reason why they must play differently, which makes it one of the more powerful V-triggers of this type. It doesn't have a big wind up, it doesn't have a big tell, even though it looks like one once you're used to it. If you're quite close to him, you're probably in trouble unless you're expecting the move already. It also combines well with Sumo Splash and other similar things. It will of course still be easy to get the points when he uses it in that way, because you can always literally just see it coming early and jump out. But that's a situation in which Honda has knocked you down already, and generally in bots we don't worry about situations where in order to get the point the player has to have taken damage. If you are using the bot correctly, you should be running out of health. And this is actually a somewhat valid strategy in a real game anyway. If you can see a situation where doing something that isn't too dangerous to you will lure your opponent into making a big mistake, there's really no harm in it overall until they catch on. But that move has quite long range, and as a command grab, it's stressful to deal with. And that, as you've just seen with the 100 hand slap, is one of the most stressful timings and ways of having to deal with it. However, you can practice through and learn to get out of that, and you can do it fairly calmly too. But it does take some practice, and that is of course what bots are always for, to get you to that feeling of confidence in your ability to expect this move is coming and use your reaction to get out of it without necessarily just panicking and doing it immediately. You can train yourself primarily to watch the animations of other moves. If they seem to end too quickly, that's your tell. You don't specifically need to wait to see him do that version. Simply look for something else he has hit, get used to the animations of those moves, and when you see one looking like it's ending early when it shouldn't be cancelable, this also applies to the other headbutt, but you sometimes get hit with that one. Learning to react to that move when he does it raw, as you call it, is a little bit trickier. Especially if he's fairly close and basically playing footsies at the time. However, the dash-up version is also somewhat reactable. Just make sure that you're actually reacting to seeing the startup of that, and not just the fact that he dashed. And of course, that's what this is for, practice. Your main problem is in fact, as you've just seen, the V skill into that move is not guaranteed in the bot, and it's extremely confusing because of the way he moves, at least at first. As you get used to it more, it'll just fall into place like everything else, but until then, use the bot to train so you don't, as you say, get raw. The move is reactable, and therefore your opponent should not be able to just do that. Note of course that as you've just seen that you can evade the move without punishing it, and for this you get no point. If your character has command normals that they use for anti-airs, such as Akuma and Chun-Li, the Sumo Splash actually can become very dangerous to you because of the timing of when he goes over your head. In fact, I'd suggest strongly not using those types of things at all. Even if you are fairly fast, as you can see the move often doesn't necessarily go as far forward as you think it will if it's light. And it goes over your head and messes with your command if you're even slightly slow when you're not. You can try option selecting by doing the forward version of the move instead, but both for Akuma and Chun-Li this is an even worse idea, and there are other characters who have similar problems. Meaning that if you want to deal with Sumo Splash properly, you have to come up with something else. That is the obvious option from this side, but most characters can't just do that sort of thing immediately. Air-to-airs are a good option against the Sumo Splash in a lot of cases. In fact, interestingly, there's usually a different button than your usual air-to-air. It also unfortunately doesn't tend to work that well against his regular jumps. So you need to be able to tell the difference fairly quickly. You also need to react fairly quickly, particularly if he is reasonably far out. The closer he gets, the more dangerous it is to try to react by hitting him at all. So of course, train until becomes second nature, but note that if you don't get him fast enough, going for the air version is still more helpful in a lot of cases. Not necessarily because Sumo Splash has a lot of setups, but simply because you've moved slightly forward from your current position, which means that if you were close to the corner, you have bought yourself just a little bit more time in how he can put you there, as he takes long enough to recover from the move even on hit, that he doesn't necessarily get to beat you up or push you forward on the ground with his dashes. He also, in the light version, always hops backward after it, creating enough space that you end up benefiting from it. If you think he's going to do the light one, and he's not close enough for it to really be a problem, it's similar to Fault, in which you punish more so by just jumping at him as he does it. And most likely yours will land, he won't be able to do too much of anything. Beyond that, your best option is usually just to dash under it. This is actually possible and correct even when he does only the light one, but the timing for it for certain characters might be bad. If you have a faster dash, you can absolutely do this. Just on the second button tap, just hold the button. But you do have to react quite quickly. The reason the forward dash versus back dash, you're generally hoping to not have to use them separately, is simply that the character would then be forcing you into a choice that relies on you recognizing something and then recognizing relatively late into it at that, which of two things you should do that need to be input fairly quickly. You're better off, probably at least for some time, even considering the medium one, which doesn't hit either. If your character's dash distance is good, especially if their forward dash distance is good, most of them tend to be better than the back dashes. There are a few characters that have back dashes so bad that technically you shouldn't risk back dashing against Sumo Splash at all. Fortunately, he's also a character where dashing under his jumps is actually fairly beneficial to you, as most of his jumps don't cross up that well, and he tends to want to push you toward the corner in the first place, meaning that dashing under a jump, if you are fast enough to do it, is just straight benefit to you. And there's the final reason. If you've already tapped forward once on every character in response to seeing the Sumo Splash, you should be able to, with some practice, get yourself to not hit it the second time. Meaning that even if you were not certain and you don't have the best timing, if you are at the right timing to start with, or rather the right spacing to start with, and you recognize, oh, if I dash here, I'm going to go into this move, you can in fact react and not finish your dash. If you are quite close to him, and you see him go for it, you just always dash, and the problem is solved. successfully to HondaBot is a demonstration of exactly the damage you take from taking 2 Oicho throws on a 950 health character. It's a decent amount of damage, but the light version, which is the one he does here, is much less, and generally you shouldn't be so stressed or threatened by it. The final point, as you've finally seen, is that depending on the speed of your dash and Honda's movement, the way your character's body interacts with the hitbox on the Sumo Splash is deceptive. As in, you can in fact dash into Sumo Splash, look like you should get hit, and just not. And for a lot of characters this is very important. As soon as he has reached head height, you can be dashing into this move and not taking any damage. Unfortunately, you still have to be ready to react to a lot of stuff after that. So do bear it in mind. Those are, however, our general advices as to how to use this bot and your best possible outcomes for a lot of situations. As always, this relies a lot on how strong your character is in certain things they can do, but most of the slower characters have much better ways of dealing with Sumo Splash. Armor, parries, invincible moves that go basically straight up. There's not as much to worry about for slower characters who can't dash out of the way. So watch out for those jumps. Learn his moves and their full animations so you can tell them he's cancelled them early. And don't commit too hard to footsies with this character. I hope that's all helped though. And you will be seeing the disc guidance for Lucia and Poison in the coming Fridays, probably. We may do one of them earlier on a Wednesday perhaps, since we intend to release all the bots at 2-mk.org/bots this weekend, this Sunday. That should probably be between 6 and 8 Eastern time, depending on minor technical things. And they also have variants and some strict timings, which means that the disc guidance needs to be comprehensive, despite the fact that the bot will already be available. If there are any corrections or changes that need to be made to the Lucia or Poison bots after they're released, they'll be mentioned in the disc guidance for those who picked them up early. But if you're watching these sorts of videos in order and for whatever reason don't have direct access to when they were posted, know that 3 disc guidance were not together. Next week Monday you will be able to find us in our usual mishmash in Battle Lounge for Street Fighter V. And Tuesday and Wednesday are completely unclear. Thursday should as always be Kame House, our beginner Dragon Ball FighterZ lobby. And next Friday, based on the team's decisions so far, next Friday is Lucia Bot. So we're off to check for any new tech that needs to be implemented or integrated into those two. Before they're released on Sunday. I hope it was helpful. This has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night everyone.